She heard every word. The woman near the platform didn't bother to lower her voice. She really thinks a cowboy will marry someone like her. Abigail Carter didn't turn around. She picked up her battered valise, straightened her spine, and walked forward, not because she wasn't hurting, but because she had taught herself long ago that the only direction available to a woman like her was forward. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow Abigail's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The train had been delayed by 4 hours, and by the time Abigail Carter stepped onto the platform at Harlow Creek, Montana, the afternoon light had already gone thin and the August heat had turned mean. She had one valise. She had $11.40 folded into the lining of her coat. She had a letter of correspondence from a man named Samuel Whitaker, who ran a cattle ranch 6 miles outside of town and needed someone to manage his kitchen and household accounts. She did not have beauty, according to most people who had known her in Tennessee. She did not have the kind of figure men wrote poems about, or the kind of face that stopped strangers in doorways. What she had was her back, which was straight, and her hands, which were capable, and a stubbornness that had kept her alive through things that would have broken a less determined woman. She also had pressed flat in the bottom of her valise, beneath 2 cotton dresses and a spare pair of boots, a letter she had never opened again after the first reading. The one from a man named Gerald Pruitt, who had once promised to marry her and then, 3 days before the wedding, sent a note explaining that he had reconsidered, that he needed a wife who presented well, and Abigail, while admirable in many ways, was simply not what he had envisioned. She had not cried when she read it. She had folded it precisely in half, placed it in her valise, and begun answering advertisements in the newspaper. That was 8 months ago. She did not think about Gerald Pruitt anymore. Or so she told herself. The woman on the platform, wide hat, silk collar, the kind of ease in her posture that came from never having needed anything, did not even attempt to whisper when Abigail walked past. "Lord, look at her," she answered the Whitaker posting. Her companion, a younger woman with copper hair, glanced sideways. "She's the one. Cora Hensley told me this morning. Came all the way from Tennessee. Samuel Whitaker is going to take one look at her and send her right back." Abigail walked past them without changing her pace. She had long since learned which expressions to keep on her face in these moments. Not a flinch, not a flush of embarrassment, not the tight-lipped anger that might give someone the satisfaction of knowing they had landed a blow. She kept her face the way she kept her hands, useful, controlled, ready for the next task. Inside the station office, a boy of about 14 with sunburned ears was leaning against the counter, eating a biscuit. He looked up when Abigail pushed through the door. "I need directions to the Whitaker ranch," she said. "And if there's someone willing to take me out in a wagon, I'll pay reasonable." The boy blinked. "You Whitaker's new cook?" "I'm his new household manager," she said. "There's a difference." He seemed to find this funny, but he swallowed the last of his biscuit and wiped his hand on his trousers. "My uncle's got a wagon. He charges 2 bits. Then get him." The road to the ranch was longer than 6 miles felt on paper. Abigail sat straight in the back of the wagon and watched the land open up around her. She had grown up with Tennessee's soft green hills and its rivers, the color of rain. And Montana was nothing like that. Montana was wide and blunt and enormous. The sky here did not curve gently overhead. It pressed down, immense and serious, as though it had been watching longer than any human being, and had formed its own quiet opinions. She found she did not dislike it. The boy's uncle, a taciturn man named Delbert, who communicated primarily through the movement of his jaw, pulled the wagon up to the ranch gate and pointed toward the main house without comment. Abigail paid him. She picked up her valise. She walked through the gate. The first person she saw was a man coming out of the barn. He was tall, taller than she expected. He moved the way men who have worked hard ground for a long time move, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the kind of efficiency that means every step has a purpose. He had a worn leather hat and dark hair gone silver at the temples, and a jaw that looked like it had been cut rather than grown. His hands, when she noticed them, were the hands of someone who had been doing difficult work since before she was born. He stopped when he saw her, not with surprise exactly, more with the careful attention of someone who looks at something carefully before forming an opinion. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Whitaker," she said. "You made it, I said I would." He nodded once, as though this were sufficient information. "Henry will show you the house. Supper's at 6. The accounts are in the front room on the left. I'll need a report by end of week." He turned back toward the barn. Abigail said, "Is that all?" He paused, looked back over his shoulder. "You expected something else? Most employers ask about experience. References. I read your letter," he said. "You ran a boarding house in Nashville for 3 years. Before that, you cooked for a family of 7 and kept their books. You said you were capable and honest. I don't generally hire people and then immediately question whether they are what they said." He looked at her for one more moment, steady and direct, and then he went back into the barn. Abigail stood there for a count of 4. Then she picked up her valise and went to find Henry. Henry turned out to be Henry Marsh, 61 years old, knock-kneed, with a white beard and the cheerful disposition of a man who had decided some years ago that life was a comedy and he was prepared to enjoy the show. He was the ranch's general hand, errand runner, and, as near as Abigail could tell, the closest thing the place had to a social institution. "You're taller than I thought," he told her as he showed her the kitchen. "I hear that sometimes," she said. "It's a compliment. We had a cook last year who couldn't reach the upper shelves. Had to drag a stool everywhere she went. Made a terrible racket." He opened a cabinet and gestured inside. "Dry goods. Sam likes the accounts kept weekly, not monthly. He'll never say anything if you miss a week, but he'll notice. He notices everything, that man. Just doesn't always say." "How long have you worked here?" 11 years. "Since before his wife passed." Henry's voice dropped a note without becoming theatrical about it, the kind of drop that comes from genuine feeling. 4 years ago that was. Fever took her fast. Ruth was a good woman. Sam didn't come back to himself for a long while after. Abigail said nothing. She filed the information away carefully. Not as something to use, but as something to understand. "Ranch has been running thin since," Henry continued. "Not for money, exactly. Sam manages the cattle fine. But a ranch needs more than cattle managed. It needs someone to keep the rest of it from falling apart at the seams. You understand what I'm saying?" "I understand," she said. Henry looked at her for a moment, with something that wasn't quite assessment and wasn't quite sympathy. "You hungry? I made biscuits this morning. They're not much, but they'll hold you." "I would appreciate that," Abigail said. She was in the kitchen unpacking her supplies. She had brought her own kit of spices and a good knife when she heard the voices outside the back door. 2 of the ranch hands. She did not know their names yet. Sam really hired that woman? Apparently. What does she know about running a cattle ranch? Said she can cook and keep books. That's what Sam posted for. She doesn't look like she belongs here. There was a pause. And then the other voice said, with a particular flatness that was worse than cruelty, because it was so casual, "She doesn't look like she belongs anywhere." Abigail set her knife down on the counter with precise and deliberate click. She picked it up again. She began chopping the dried herbs she had brought for the first supper: rosemary, thyme, a small piece of dried sage, and she did not go to the door and she did not say anything. What she felt moved through her and she let it move, and she went on working. This was not new. This was simply the world behaving in its habitual way. The question was whether she was going to let the world's habits become her habits too. She decided she was not. Supper that first evening was held in the ranch's long table, 8 men in total, plus Henry, plus Samuel Whitaker at the head. Abigail served. She had made a venison stew with biscuits and a dried apple pie, with the last of the apples she had found in the cellar. Going soft but salvageable if you knew what to do with them. She noticed the men's expressions when they tasted the stew. Not the expressions they were making when they thought she was watching. Those were studied neutrality. The careful blankness of men who had already decided to form no particular opinion of her. But the expressions that crossed their faces in the half-second before they remembered to be careful, when the flavor hit them and bypassed whatever they'd been planning to think. That half-second was enough. She refilled Henry's coffee without being asked. She caught a quiet nod of acknowledgement from him and returned to the kitchen. Samuel Whitaker ate without commenting on the food. But he ate all of it, which was, as Abigail was coming to understand, probably his equivalent of a compliment. The incident happened on the third day. Abigail had been moving a supply crate from the barn to the kitchen heavy, unwieldy, full of winter preserves that had arrived on the supply wagon and needed to be counted and stored. She had it halfway across the yard when one of the ranch hands cut in front of her with a horse, forcing her to step sideways suddenly, and her boot caught in a rut in the dirt. She went down on one knee. The crate tilted. Several jars slid and two of them shattered on the ground. Preserves, spreading dark across the dirt. She heard the laughter before she had even fully registered what had happened. Two men off to her left watching. One of them younger, sandy-haired, with the kind of smile that had probably gotten him in and out of trouble in equal measure, called out, "Better check if she broke anything. The jars, I mean." The other one snorted. Abigail got to her feet. Her knee throbbed where it had hit the ground, and her dress had mud on it. And she had just destroyed 2 jars of preserved plums that represented someone's work and money. And she stood there for a moment, doing what she had learned to do. She breathed. She assessed. She did not cry. "Set it down," the voice came from behind her. Low, not loud, she turned. Samuel Whitaker was coming across the yard. He looked at the broken jars. He looked at the men, who were still trying to decide if they should stop smiling. He looked at the sandy-haired man. "That horse is supposed to be in the east paddock," he said. The young man's smile flickered. "I was just taking him to water. Through the supply yard. It was faster." It wasn't faster. It was careless. Samuel's voice had not risen. It was, if anything, quieter than before, and Abigail had already learned enough about this man to understand that quieter was not better. You put a horse in the path of someone carrying weight, and then you laughed when she fell. "You're done laughing." The young man opened his mouth. "Done," Samuel said. The man closed his mouth. He took the horse and left. Samuel turned to the crate. He picked it up as though it weighed nothing it weighed. Abigail estimated the better part of 50 pounds, and he carried it to the kitchen door without a word. He set it down. He turned back to go. "Mr. Whitaker," Abigail said. He stopped. "Thank you." She paused. "But I would have managed." He looked at her for a moment. Not with skepticism and not with dismissal. He looked at her the way she had noticed. He looked at things with that careful attention, as though he was filing something away. "I know you would have," he said. "That's not why I did it." He walked back toward the barn. Abigail stood at the kitchen door with the crate at her feet and the broken jars drying in the afternoon sunshine, and something shifting inside her that she could not quite name and was not sure she trusted. That evening, she sat with the account books in the front room by lamplight and began working through the numbers. The books were not in disaster. Samuel Whitaker was not a careless man, but they had been maintained the way a man who has been keeping records alone for years maintains things. Functional, but not elegant. Accurate, but harder to read than they needed to be. She began reorganizing them, column by column, week by week. She was deep into September of the previous year when she heard boots on the porch. The door opened, and Samuel came in, stopping when he saw her at the desk. "You're still up," he said. The books needed sorting. He came closer, looked over her shoulder at what she was doing. She felt his presence behind her, warm, solid, smelling of horse and leather, and the particular clean earth smell of a man who works outdoors. She kept her eyes on the page. "You changed the format," he said. "I can change it back if you prefer." He was quiet for a moment. "No, this is clearer. Column summaries on the right. Weekly totals here, annual projection at the bottom. It'll take you less time to read." He was quiet again. Then, "Why did you learn bookkeeping?" "I needed work," she said. "And I found that employers would rather pay worth one person who can do several things than pay several people to do one thing each. Practical. Necessary. She set down her pen. I grew up with very little, Mr. Whitaker. I learned to make myself useful because there wasn't another option. She heard him pull out the chair across from the desk and sit down, which surprised her enough that she looked up. What made you answer my posting? He asked. You could have stayed in Nashville. There wasn't a good reason to stay. Family? My mother died when I was 16. My father when I was 22. I have a sister in Georgia I haven't seen in 3 years. She said it plainly. Without drama, because it was simply true. I had a position at a boarding house, but it closed when the owner sold the building. I had been corresponding with a former guest who told me about opportunities in Montana, and then I saw your advertisement. He nodded. And you? She asked. Why did you post the advertisement? Henry tells me you've been managing without a household keeper for some time. Something moved across his face, not quite discomfort. Not quite surprise. He had not expected her to ask. The accounts were falling behind, he said, and the men need feeding properly. Not just fed. That's a practical reason. Yes. Is there another one? He looked at her. The lamplight was doing something to the angles of his face, softening them slightly, making him look, for a moment, like a man who was tired in a way that went deeper than muscle. The ranch needs to work, he said finally. That's the only reason. It was not the whole truth. She was certain of it, but she did not push, because she understood the value of leaving doors open rather than forcing them. Well, she said and picked up her pen. Then we'd better make sure it does. The next morning she rose at 4:30 and had breakfast on the table by 5:15, which was 45 minutes earlier than the previous arrangement. She had made eggs, salt pork, hot coffee, and cornbread that she had started the night before. When the men came in from the early feeding, they stopped in the doorway with the expressions of people who had not been expecting something but had received it anyway. Henry sat down and took a piece of cornbread and bit into it and closed his eyes briefly. Where did you come from? He said, and it was not entirely a question. The sandy-haired man whose name she had learned was Pete Dalton sat down at the far end of the table and did not look at her. She poured his coffee without comment. He said nothing, but he drank it. That was enough, for now. She was clearing plates when Samuel came in. He was already dressed for the day, hat on, the set of his shoulders, indicating he had been up longer than she had. He stopped in the doorway, looked at the table, looked at the empty plates. You started earlier, he said. The men ride out at 5. If breakfast isn't ready until 6, half of them aren't eating. And a man who doesn't eat doesn't work well. He said nothing. He poured his own coffee and stood at the counter and drank it. And she kept working. And they were in the same room together, and it was not uncomfortable. And Abigail noticed this because she had not been in a room with another person that was not uncomfortable for longer than she could accurately remember. The woman arrived on a Thursday. Abigail was on the porch, checking the herb garden she had started in 3 clay pots she'd found in the cellar: rosemary, thyme, flat-leaf parsley, none of them established, yet but beginning when she heard the carriage on the road. A fine carriage, not the kind that came to working ranches. The woman who stepped out of it was beautiful in the way that certain women are beautiful deliberately, carefully, as though beauty was a thing they had decided to be and had committed to it fully. Dark hair, good boots, a dress that had been made for her specifically and by someone who knew their business. She walked to the porch with the ease of someone who had never arrived anywhere and doubted her welcome. You must be the new help, she said to Abigail. I'm the household manager, Abigail said. The woman looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite contempt and not quite pity. Something between the two, and somehow worse for the mixing. Is Samuel here? He's in the south field. Henry can go for him if you like. Please do. She smiled. It was a practiced smile, the kind that could mean many things. I'm Clara Benson. Sam and I are old friends. I'll send Henry, Abigail said, and went inside. She told Henry. She went back to her herb pots. She did not watch the yard, though she could hear the voices when Samuel came back: Clara's, bright and carrying, and Samuel's, measured and careful, in the particular way it got when he was being polite to someone he was not sure about. She heard Clara laugh. It was a deliberate laugh, the kind of laugh that was meant to be overheard. Pete Dalton came past her, on the porch, heading for the water barrel. He paused, looked toward the yard, looked at Abigail. "Don't let Benson get under your skin," he said, not quite looking at her. She looked at him. He had not spoken directly to her since the incident in the yard. "Clara Benson. She's been after the ranch for 2 years. Thinks if she gets Sam, she gets the land." He lifted a shoulder. "She's not what she appears to be. Most people aren't," Abigail said. He almost smiled. Then he went to the water barrel. Clara Benson stayed for 2 hours. When she left, she stopped on the porch where Abigail was now working on the supply inventory. "You've made quite an impression in a short time," she said pleasantly. "I try to do my work well," Abigail said. "Of course." Clara tilted her head. "Samuel is a man who values loyalty above almost everything else. He's been alone a long time. He's vulnerable, I think, though he'd never admit it. A man in that position can mistake gratitude for something more." Abigail looked up from her list. "That's a kind warning," she said, "but I'm not sure what you're warning me against." Clara smiled again. "Simply that a man like Samuel deserves someone who can give him what he truly needs. Someone who fits into his world, into his life." She let the pause do its work. "I wouldn't want you to get confused about what this position is." She went down the porch steps and got into her carriage and was gone. Abigail looked at her inventory list. She looked at the herb pots. She looked at the long, wide Montana sky going orange at the western edge. She wrote the next item on the list. That night she could not sleep. She lay in the narrow bed in the small room Henry had shown her, a real room. A private room, which was better than she'd had at 2 of her previous positions, and she listened to the ranch breathe around her. The sound of horses shifting, the wind against the roof, the distant low of cattle. She was not thinking about Clara Benson. She was thinking about Gerald Pruett's letter, which was still in her valise. Not because she wanted to read it, but because she could feel its weight from across the room, the way you sometimes feel the weight of a thing that has been given too much space in your life. He had written, "I need a wife who presents well. I have thought about this carefully, and I believe we would both be better served by making this decision now, before either of us has made an irreversible mistake." She had read it 12 times in the first week. Then she had stopped reading it. But she had not thrown it away, and she had not been able to fully understand why. She thought she might understand now. She had kept it as evidence. Evidence that her own estimate of herself was correct, that she was too much of this thing, and not enough of that thing, and that the world would always eventually confirm it. She had kept the letter so that the next time someone was kind to her, she would have something to measure it against, something to remind her not to believe in it too far. A man who says, "That's not why I did it." A man who sits down across from you in his own house and asks a real question and listens to the answer. A man whose quiet is different from coldness, whose stillness is different from absence. She turned over in the narrow bed. She was not a woman who let herself get confused about positions. Clara Benson's warning was unnecessary and insulting, and also she admitted this only to herself. In the full dark, not entirely without a target, because something had moved in her these past few days. She had felt it, and she did not trust it. She was almost asleep when she heard the boots on the porch again. Samuel making one last round. She had begun to understand that this was his habit, a last circuit of the property before he slept. Checking each thing, making sure. The boots paused outside her window. Not long, just a moment. Then they moved on. Abigail lay with her eyes open, and the darkness pressing gently on her chest, and told herself that she was here to work, that she was good at working, that this was what she knew, and what she could trust, and that everything else was a kind of weather, unpredictable, temporary, passing. She almost believed it. On the 5th day, Samuel Whitaker made a mistake. He had ridden into town for supplies and run into Clara Benson at the general store. And Clara had said, in the sweet and casual way she had, that she hoped the new housekeeper was working out. And Samuel, not thinking, said that yes, she was capable and reliable. And Clara had smiled and said, "I heard she came with quite a history." That failed engagement in Tennessee. Poor woman. And Samuel. Instead of asking where Clara had heard this, or whether it was true, or why it should matter if it was, Samuel had said nothing. He had finished his business and ridden back to the ranch. He did not mention it to Abigail. He did not mention it to anyone. But Henry had been in the general store. Henry had heard. And Henry, who was not a man who kept things to himself when keeping them seemed unkind, told Abigail that evening in the kitchen while she was making bread. She kept her hands moving in the dough. He didn't say anything, she said. He didn't correct her, Henry said. That's not the same as agreeing. But it's not the same as disagreeing either. He looked uncomfortable. I thought you should know. Because people in town will talk. And if Sam doesn't, I understand, Abigail said. Henry left. She worked the dough for a long time after that. Longer than it needed, because the rhythm of it was useful, and she needed something useful to do with her hands. She was not devastated. She had not expected Samuel Whitaker to be her champion in a general store. She had not expected anything from him at all, and she had been careful not to. And she had believed she was managing that carefulness well. But there was something smaller and more honest than devastation that she had to acknowledge. The brief, foolish hope she had apparently been carrying without permission for 5 days had just shown her exactly how much weight it had. She punched the dough down. She started over. He came to the kitchen that night. She was still there. The bread was in the iron pot now. The fire banked correctly, and she was reviewing the week's accounts by the light of a single candle because she had let her lamp run low and hadn't wanted to bother Henry for oil. Samuel stood in the doorway for a moment before she looked up. I heard Henry talk to you, he said. Yes. He came in. He did not sit down. He stood with his hat in his hands. And she watched him turn it, a small, almost invisible movement. The nervous habit of a man who was not accustomed to being nervous. I should have said something to Clara. Yes, Abigail said. You should have. He looked at her. She looked back. She was not going to make this easier for him than it was. Because she had done that before, had smoothed things over and taken the smaller portion and made it comfortable, and she was tired of it. I didn't know what she had said until after. He began. She said it in front of you, Abigail said. You were there. A pause. She mentioned a failed engagement. I didn't. He stopped. Started again. I didn't ask whether it was true or whether it was her business. That was wrong. It was another pause. Longer. I'm telling you I was wrong, he said. I'm not telling you it won't happen again. Because I can't promise that. I'm a man who doesn't always react correctly in the moment. But I saw it after and I'm here. Abigail looked at him for a long time. My engagement ended, she said, because the man decided I wasn't what he had envisioned. He was not specific. He didn't need to be. I knew what he meant. She set down her pen. I came to Montana to work, Mr. Whitaker, not to run from anything. Not because I couldn't find another position, because I wanted a real position, one where the work mattered and was treated as mattering. That's what I came here for. I know that, he said. Then act like it. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he nodded once, the same nod he had given her on the first day, the one that meant sufficient. Good night, Miss Carter, he said. Good night, Mr. Whitaker. He left. The kitchen was quiet. The bread was rising in the iron pot, and the candle was burning low. And somewhere on the other side of the wall, the Montana wind was picking up. And Abigail sat for a while longer in the particular silence of a moment that has shifted something without yet revealing what it has shifted into. She did not reach for Gerald Pruitt's letter. She picked up her pen instead. She went back to work. The bread she had made that night was gone by 6 the next morning. Every last piece of it, including the heel that men usually left behind. Abigail found the empty iron pot and said nothing. But she noted it the way she noted everything as information, as evidence of something real. She had slept 4 hours. It was enough. She had learned to function on less in Nashville. In the years when the boarding house needed more from her than any single day had hours to give. She rose. She worked. She did not dwell on the conversation with Samuel Whitaker. or the particular quality of silence he had left behind in the kitchen. She dwelled on it a little. She was refilling the flour canister when Pete Dalton came into the kitchen before the others, which he had never done. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand, an unconscious gesture. She was beginning to understand the way men in this part of the world signaled that they were attempting to be civil. "I want to say something," he said. She kept filling the canister. "Then say it. I was rude to you. First few days." He shifted his weight. "I don't have a good reason. Just habit, I guess. When someone new comes in, I wait to see what they're made of. It's not a good habit." "No," she said. "It isn't." He stood there. She turned around. "You make the best biscuits I've had since my mother's," he said. "That's not an apology. That's just true." She looked at him for a moment. He was young, maybe 23, 24, with the kind of face that would someday be weathered and interesting, but was still, at this age, mostly just earnest. "Apology accepted," she said. "Set the table. The others will be in at 5. He set the table without being told twice. That was the first small thing that changed. There would be others. The accounts she had been reorganizing told a story she had not expected. She found it on the 8th day, working by lamplight after supper while the ranch settled into its nighttime sounds around her. She had been going column by column through the previous year's records, building the clearer system she had begun, and she hit a section from March that stopped her. A payment, substantial, to a company called Harlow Creek Land and Cattle Associates. She had seen the name twice before, once in April, once in June. Each payment was identical in amount, and none of them were labeled with anything more specific than land agreement. Quarterly, she looked for a corresponding contract or deed. There was nothing in the account books. She checked the front room's filing cabinet, which Samuel kept locked but had given her the key to when she took over the accounts. She found the cattle records, the feed receipts, the tax documents. No contract for Harlow Creek Land and Cattle Associates. She sat with this for a long time. It might be nothing. A verbal agreement, payment for grazing rights, any number of ordinary explanations. But payments of that size, made quarterly, with no supporting documentation, that was not ordinary. That was something a man who valued precision had not made precise. She wrote it on a separate sheet of paper. She placed the sheet in the back of her own account journal, which she kept with her personal things. She did not mention it to anyone. "Not yet, you're up early again." She had not heard him come in. Samuel was in the kitchen doorway at 4:40, still in his coat, and she was at the table with her coffee and the separate sheet she had been staring at for the better part of an hour. She turned it over. "I sleep lightly." He came in and poured his own coffee, and leaned against the counter the way he had begun to do in these early morning hours, not intrusive, not deliberately companionable, but present. She had come to understand that Samuel Whitaker's presence was different from most people's. He did not take up the room the way men his size often did. He simply occupied his share of it, and the remainder was still yours. "Something's bothering you," he said. "I'm fine. You turned something over on that table." She looked at her coffee. Then she made a decision. She turned the sheet back over and slid it across to him. He set down his coffee. He read it. She watched his face, which told her less than she would have liked. The jaw went slightly tighter, and something moved behind his eyes, but it was gone before she could read it clearly. "Where did you find this?" he said. "March accounts. Then April, then June. The same amount all 3 times. I can't find a contract anywhere in the filing." "There isn't one in the filing," he said. "Should there be?" A pause. He was looking at the paper and not at her. "It's a land agreement," he said, "for grazing rights on the east section. I deal with prefers verbal arrangements. That's a substantial amount of money for an undocumented verbal arrangement. I'm aware of that. If anything happened to you, or to him, there would be no legal basis for." "I'm aware of that," he said again. His voice had not sharpened, but it had stopped, the way a door stops when it meets its frame. Abigail looked at him. "I'm not asking to be difficult. I'm asking because it's my job to understand the accounts I'm keeping." "I know that." "Then tell me what I should put in the record." He was quiet. He picked up his coffee, held it without drinking. Grazing rights East Section, he said finally. Paid quarterly. The man's name is Harmon Galt. He owns the land adjacent. She wrote it down. She did not ask the next question, which was, why does it feel like you're telling me less than half of what this is? She wrote it on the separate sheet instead, and put it in her journal, and went on with the morning. Clara Benson came back on a Wednesday. Abigail saw the carriage from the kitchen window and felt nothing in particular, which she was moderately proud of. She kept on with the lunch preparations, a pot of beef and barley that had been going since morning, bread that was already baked and cooling on the rack. Clara did not come to the front door. She came around to the kitchen. "I'd like to speak with you," she said from the doorway. Abigail turned around. "Come in then." Clara came in. She looked at the kitchen with the specific expression of someone cataloging a space they intend to change. She sat down at the table without being invited to sit, which told Abigail something. "You're making yourself comfortable here," Clara said. "I'm doing my job. You're doing more than your job." She folded her hands on the table. They were smooth hands, well kept. "I've heard from several people in town that you've been reorganizing Samuel's finances, going through his private records. He gave me the key to the filing cabinet," Abigail said, "and asked me to maintain the accounts. That's the position." "Yes, the position." Clara looked at her with that careful smile. "Abigail, may I call you Abigail?" "Miss Carter is fine." A pause. The smile didn't waver, but something behind it did. "Miss Carter, I want to be honest with you because I think honesty is kinder than pretense. Samuel is a man who has been alone for a long time. He is not always careful in these situations about what signals he sends. What situations? When a woman is living on his property, working closely with him. He's a good man. He can be generous. And sometimes people interpret that generosity as something it isn't." Abigail set down her spoon. She turned fully to face Clara Benson. She took a breath. "Mrs. Benson," she said, "I appreciate the concern. But I came here to work. I am working, and I understand my position completely. I don't need it explained to me by someone who has no part in it." Clara's smile thinned. "Just slightly. I'm trying to protect you from embarrassment, and I'm trying to make lunch," Abigail said. "Can I help you with something else? Or would you like me to let Mr. Whitaker know you're here?" A long pause. Clara stood. "You're very sure of yourself," she said. "It was meant to be a criticism." "No," Abigail said. "I'm very sure of my work." "There's a difference." Clara left. Abigail turned back to the stove. Her hands were entirely steady. She noted this with something that was not quite satisfaction, but was in the same neighborhood. "He found out, of course." Henry told him. Henry told Samuel most things eventually, with the cheerful guilelessness of a man who genuinely believed that information flow was a public good. Samuel came to the kitchen that evening while Abigail was washing up, and he stood in the doorway and said, "Henry says Clara came to the kitchen today." "She did." "What did she want?" "To warn me against misinterpreting your generosity." Abigail wrung out the cloth and hung it. "I told her my position was clear." Samuel said nothing for a moment. "She had no business coming to the kitchen." "No. She didn't. She won't do it again." "I assumed you'd say that." She turned around. "How long has she been trying to marry you?" His expression flickered, surprised by the directness. She thought, but not offended by it. "About 2 years." "Do you want to?" "No." "Then tell her that directly, instead of letting her believe otherwise. It would be kinder to both of you, and it would save me several more kitchen visits." He looked at her for a moment with the particular look she was coming to know, the careful, filing something away look. "You don't soften things," he said. "I soften things when softening is useful," she said. "When it isn't, I don't. Most people soften things because it's easier for them, not because it's useful for anyone." "I know," she said. "I spent a long time doing that. I stopped." He was quiet. Then he said unexpectedly, "When?" She looked at him. "When I realized that softening things for other people's comfort was costing me my own." He took this in. She could see him taking it in the way a man who thinks carefully about things actually receives information turning it over, placing it. "I'll speak to Clara," he said. "Thank you." He nodded. He started to turn, "Mr. Whitaker." He stopped. "The Harmon Galt payments. Is the man legitimate?" Something crossed his face then. Quick, controlled but real. "What makes you ask?" "I looked him up in the county registry. Henry had in the back room. I can't find a Harmon Galt who owns land adjacent to this property." A long silence. "You looked him up," Samuel said. "It's my job to understand the accounts." He turned back fully. His face had changed, not angry, not caught, but something tighter. Something careful in a new way. "Leave that line alone," he said. "I'll explain it when I can, when you can," she repeated. Yes, she held his gaze. He held hers. "All right," she said. "But when you can, Mr. Whitaker. Not when it's convenient." When you can, he left, and she stood in the quiet kitchen with the sound of the wind rising outside. And she knew the way you know certain things. Before you can explain the knowing that whatever the Harmon-Galt payments were, they were not a grazing rights arrangement, and that Samuel Whitaker was not a dishonest man, which meant something was pressing on him that he had not yet decided to name. She did not sleep well that night either. 3 days later she found the letter. It was not hidden. That was almost the strangest part. It was in the second drawer of the filing cabinet, in a plain envelope that had been opened and refolded, under a stack of cattle ledgers from 2 years previous. She found it while looking for a deed reference, something that should have been filed and wasn't, and she pulled it out before she registered what it was. She almost put it back unread. She told herself she would. She read the first line to determine whether it was relevant to her work, and then she read the rest of it because she was a person who, when confronted with information, was constitutionally unable to pretend she hadn't received it. It was from a law firm in Helena, dated 14 months ago. It described, in the measured language of legal correspondence, a dispute over the eastern parcel of the Whitaker Ranch specifically, a claim by Harlow Creek Land and Cattle Associates that a verbal agreement made with the late Ruth Whitaker before her death constituted a binding commitment to sell the parcel at a fixed price, and that Samuel Whitaker's refusal to honor this commitment was actionable. Ruth Whitaker, his wife, who had died 4 years ago. Someone had convinced her, in her final months, to agree to sell a piece of her husband's land. And now they were using that agreement, which she may or may not have fully understood, to pressure Samuel into a sale he had never agreed to. The quarterly payments, the ones with no contract, no documentation, were not grazing rights. They were, she realized, payments Samuel was making to keep the case out of court. Buying time, month after month, paying a sum large enough to keep the lawyers quiet while he tried to find another way. She sat with the letter for a long time. Then she put it exactly where she had found it. Exactly as she had found it. She did not take notes this time. She did not write it on a separate sheet. She went back to the kitchen and started on supper and thought about what it meant to be a man who had just lost his wife and then discovered that someone had used her final vulnerable months to reach into his life and take something from him. What it cost to carry that alone for over a year. What kind of person could live with that weight and still run a working ranch and still come in each morning and drink his coffee with a steadiness that looked, from the outside, like simple quiet? That evening, Samuel came in for supper. He sat at the head of the table. He ate, the men talked around him, and he listened and responded when he needed to, and the room was ordinary. Only Abigail knew what was underneath the ordinary. Only she could see, now that she knew where to look, the particular way he set down his fork, slightly more carefully than the meal required. The specific direction his eyes went, when he thought no one was watching, toward the east, toward the parcel, toward the thing that was being taken from him, piece by piece. She passed him the bread without comment. He took it. He looked at her for a moment, just a moment, and she held his gaze with nothing particular on her face. Just steadiness, just presence. He looked away. She thought, I know, and I'm not going to push it, but I know. Henry caught her alone after supper. You found something in those files, he said. He was not asking. She looked at him. What makes you think that? Because you've been looking at Sam all evening the same way you look at a line in the accounts that doesn't add up. Like you've identified the problem, but you're waiting to see if it'll correct itself. She was quiet for a moment. You knew? About the land business? Some of it. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Ruth was sick for a long time before the end. She was a good woman, but she was frightened. Toward the end, in ways she didn't always tell Sam. I think someone took advantage of that. He shook his head. Sam's been paying those men to keep the lawyers off him while he tries to find the original paperwork, anything that proves Ruth's agreement wasn't legally binding. He thinks he can solve it without anyone finding out because if it came out, it would look like his wife tried to sell his land behind his back, Abigail said. Henry looked at her. That's exactly right. And Ruth didn't. She was confused and she was frightened, and someone told her the land sale would take care of Sam financially after she was gone. She thought she was helping him. His voice went rough. She was a good woman. I know, Abigail said. I can tell by how he still talks about her. Or doesn't talk about her. Henry was quiet. The documents he's looking for, she said. What kind of documents? Any written record of what was actually said to her. Who approached her? What they claimed the agreement was. Right now, all he has is their lawyer's version. She turned this over. How long has he been looking? 14 months. She stood. She started making the next morning's preparations, a thing she did each evening. Getting ahead of the 5 o'clock start. Henry, she said. That law firm in Helena. Has Sam ever gone in person? Or only corresponded? Only letters? Has he consulted his own lawyer? He consulted one in town, but the man wasn't much help. Said the verbal agreement would be hard to challenge without contradicting evidence. She measured out the flour. She measured out the salt. Get me the name of a good lawyer in Helena, she said. Not the one in town. Someone with real experience in land disputes. Henry stared at her. What are you planning? My job, she said. She told Samuel the next morning. She had rehearsed it several ways in her head during the night and had eventually discarded all the rehearsed versions because Samuel Whitaker was not a man who responded well to the careful delivery of difficult information. He responded to plain speaking. She had learned this much. She waited until the kitchen was empty, the men out. Henry occupied with the morning feeding. She set a coffee in front of him and sat down across the table, not at the desk. Not behind the accounts, but across from him at the same level, and she said, I found the letter from the Helena law firm. I wasn't looking for it. But I found it and I read it, and I know about the land dispute. He went very still. Not stiff still. The difference was significant. I put it back where I found it, she said. I didn't take notes. I haven't told anyone except Henry, who already knew. Henry, he said. His voice was careful and even. He confirmed what I suspected. I then asked him to help me identify a capable land attorney in Helena. She folded her hands on the table. I know you'll be angry about this. You have the right to be. But I'd ask you to hear me out before you say anything. He looked at her. The jaw had gone tight again. The stillness was absolute. A verbal agreement made to a woman in the final weeks of a serious illness. By a party who stood to financially benefit from her confusion, that is not a legally sound contract. It may not even be enforceable. But you won't know that until you have someone who can actually examine the case rather than just respond to their letters. She held his gaze. You have been paying those men for over a year to stay quiet. The money is bleeding the ranch, and it is not solving the problem. The silence was long. Outside, she could hear Pete Dalton calling to one of the younger hands. You went through my files, Samuel said. I found a letter while doing work you assigned to me, she said. There is a difference, though I understand if it doesn't feel like one. It doesn't feel like one. I know. I'm sorry for that. I'm not sorry for telling you. Another silence. His coffee sat untouched and cooling between them. Why, he said. Just that. She thought about it. Because Ruth was a good woman who was trying to help you. And what was done to her and to you is wrong. And you've been carrying it alone for long enough. He looked at her for a long time. His face went through something that was difficult to watch, not break down. Nothing so dramatic, but the specific, restrained movement of a man who had been keeping something compressed for too long, and was now trying to decide what to do with the pressure. He picked up his coffee. He drank. He set it down. "Get me the name of the lawyer in Helena," he said. She reached into her apron pocket and put the paper there on the table between them. He looked at her. She thought she saw something shift at the back of his eyes, something that was not gratitude exactly, and not surprise exactly, but was related to both. "You wrote it down already," he said. "I measured the flour while I was at it," she said. He looked at the paper. He looked at her. And then something happened that she had not yet seen from him in the 12 days she had been at this ranch. Samuel Whitaker almost smiled. Not a full smile. Not even close. But the line of his mouth shifted. And the deep-set eyes changed. And for one unguarded moment, she saw clearly what was underneath all that careful, necessary quiet. She looked away first. She stood up and went back to the stove. Behind her, she heard him pick up the paper and fold it and put it in his coat. She kept her hands busy because they needed something to do. And she kept her face toward the fire because it was useful to have something to look at. And she reminded herself again, firmly, why she had come here and what she knew and what she did not know and what she was not going to let herself believe before she had real evidence. But the evidence she was finding had a way of accumulating faster than she had planned. It was Pete who told her first. Pete, who had taken to appearing in the kitchen at unusual hours with varying pretexts, this time holding a bridle that needed mending and looking like he was working up to something. "Clara Benson is telling people in town that you're after Sam's property," he said. "Abigail didn't turn from the stove, is she? Says you came here with a scheme. That you answered the posting because you knew about the land trouble and figured a vulnerable man would be easy to." He stopped. "It's garbage. I'm not saying it because I believe it. I know," she said. "Thank you for telling me. Sam's going to hear it too. If he hasn't already." She turned around. "Pete, has anything I've done in the weeks I've been here suggested to you that I came here for anything other than the work?" He looked at her steadily. "No, then that's what matters to me. What I've done. Not what Clara Benson tells people." He turned the bridle in his hands. "She has a lot of friends in town. Powerful ones. Her father owns the bank. I know. If she decides to make trouble for you, she's already making trouble for me," Abigail said. "I'm still here," he almost smiled. "Yeah." He nodded. "Yeah, you are." He went back out with his bridle. Abigail turned back to the stove and stood there for a moment with her hands still and the fire going and the sound of the ranch busy around her. She was not afraid of Clara Benson. She was not afraid of what people in town said. What she was afraid of, what she had always been afraid of. Since Gerald Pruett's letter, since long before that was simpler and harder than any of that. She was afraid that she would believe in something that turned out not to be real. She was afraid of the precise moment when something that felt solid revealed itself to be less than she had thought. She had survived that moment once. She would survive it again if she had to. But she did not want to have to. She stirred the pot. She did not think about the way Samuel's mouth had shifted when he saw the paper already folded in her pocket. She thought about supper. She thought about the accounts and the Helena lawyer and the practical next step. She was very good at thinking about the practical next step. Outside, the wind was picking up, the way it did here in the late afternoon. And she could hear in it something she didn't have a name for yet, a particular energy. A particular weight. She had been in Montana 3 weeks. She was beginning to understand that the weather here did not warn you. It simply arrived. The storm came without warning on a Thursday night, which was the kind of thing Montana did build pressure for days without showing its hand, and then committed fully and without apology. Abigail heard it before she felt it. A sound like something very large moving through the dark. A low pressure change that woke her from a thin sleep at 2 in the morning. And then the wind hit the roof, and the whole ranch shuddered, and she was already out of bed and pulling on her boots before she was fully awake. She could hear men shouting outside. She could hear the horses. She went out. The yard was chaos. Wind so strong it stole her breath when she stepped off the porch. Rain not falling but driving horizontally, the kind that finds every gap in a coat and a collar and gets inside of you. She could see lanterns moving near the barn, hear Samuel's voice cutting through the noise, not panicked. Sharp and directional, the voice of a man who had been in bad situations before and understood that panic killed faster than weather. "North fence is down," Pete shouted from somewhere in the dark. "Cattle are going to push through. Take Cal and ride the line," Samuel called back. "Henry, get the barn doors. The east one is going to go if that hinge holds another 5 minutes." Abigail moved toward the barn. She could hear the horses before she reached it, the high, rolling panic of animals in a small space with a storm pressing in on every wall. She knew that sound. She had grown up near enough to working animals to know what spooked horses could do in a confined space to each other, to the structure, to anyone inside. She reached the barn door. Henry was struggling with the east latch, which had swollen in the rain and was fighting him. She put her shoulder against the door beside him and pushed, and between the two of them, they got it closed and the latch down just as something hit the outside wall, with enough force to shake the whole structure. "Good girl," Henry said, not talking to her specifically, just releasing the words into the air with relief. Inside the barn, 4 horses. The 2 oldest stood trembling but contained. The other 2 Samuel's working stock, a bay mare named Delta and a gray gelding that Pete called Smoke, were in full terror, rolling their eyes and kicking against their stalls with a rhythm that was going to break something or someone. Abigail went to Delta first. Not because she was the more dangerous animal, Smoke was bigger and angrier, but because she was the louder one, and if you could quiet the louder one, the other would follow. She had learned this from watching her father handle frightened livestock when she was 7 years old, and she had never forgotten it. She put her hand flat on Delta's neck and talked, not words in particular. Tone, the low, even, continuous sound of a human presence that was not afraid. Delta screamed and pulled and tried to rear, and Abigail kept her hand on the neck and kept talking and did not move back. Because the moment you moved back, the animal understood that its fear was real and justified, and then you lost it. She was so focused on Delta that she did not hear the barn door open. She did not hear the footsteps. She only knew Samuel was there when his hand closed around her arm and pulled. "Get out of there," he said. His voice was tight in a way she had not heard before. "She's calming down. The south wall is unstable. I need everyone out of this barn right now. She'll injure herself if we leave her." Abigail. He said her name, her first name, for the first time, and it stopped her, the way the name hit something in her chest. "Get out of the barn," she went. He brought Delta on a lead, and she took the lead from him, and held the horse in the yard in the rain while he went back in for Smoke. She stood in the full force of the storm, with Delta pressed, shaking against her side. And she watched the south wall of the barn bow and flex in the wind like something breathing. And she understood why he had pulled her out. 3 minutes after they cleared the building, the south wall gave way. Not a collapse appeal, a long shriek of wood and metal, the wall failing in sections. Abigail flinched at the sound. Delta screamed and pulled, and she held on, both hands on the lead, feet braced in the mud. Samuel came out with Smoke just before the beam above the east door came down. He got the gelding out. He stood in the rain with the horse, and he looked at the barn, and then he looked at Abigail, and he looked at the place where she had been standing 90 seconds ago. Inside the stall, her hand on Delta's neck, talking to an animal in a building that was about to come apart. His jaw worked. He did not say anything. They worked until 4 in the morning. Cattle secured, fence line roped temporarily. Horses moved to the storage shed, which was smaller but sound. Pete had a gash on his forearm from wire. Henry had twisted something in his knee, but refused to say so directly and limped with studied casualness. 2 younger hands, named Cal and Wade, had worked themselves into exhausted silence and sat against the water trough in the rain like men who had forgotten there was any other state. Abigail made coffee at 4:15. She made it in the kitchen with the door open, so people could hear she was doing it. And they came in by 1s and 2s and stood around the kitchen, holding cups and dripping water on the floor, and saying very little. Samuel came in last. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. She had a cut on her left hand from where a piece of broken latch had caught her when the barn door swung. She hadn't registered it at the time and had been aware of it only as an abstract fact for the last hour. The way you register minor injuries during high activity and file them for later. He crossed the kitchen, took her hand, turned it over. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine, Abigail," the name again. The same quality in it as before, not a command, not a request. Something more direct than either. She sat down. He went to the cabinet where she had reorganized the supplies and found the clean cloth and the iodine that she had herself moved to the third shelf because it was logical. He sat down across from her. He cleaned the cut with the iodine, and she did not make a sound, which took some effort. He wrapped the hand with the cloth, not loosely, not too tight, efficient, as though he had done this before. "You went into that barn," he said, while his hands were still working. "The horses needed. You went to that barn alone before you knew how bad the wall was. I knew what the horses were going to do to each other if they stayed panicked in a confined. I know you knew." His hands stilled on the cloth. He didn't look up immediately. "That's not why I'm saying it." She waited. He looked up. The lamplight was low, and the rain was still going outside, and everyone else in the kitchen had gone quiet. In the particular way people go quiet when something is happening that is none of their business but is impossible not to feel. "You could have been hurt badly," he said. "That wall was 30 seconds from failing when I came in. I know that now. You couldn't have known it then, no. But someone had to go in." His hands moved again, finishing the wrap, securing the end. He did not let go of her hand immediately. It was a matter of a second or two, an oversight. Maybe or maybe not, and then he released it and sat back. "Don't go into a failing structure alone," he said. "All right, I mean that." I said, "All right, Mr. Whitaker." Henry, from somewhere near the stove, made a small sound that was not quite a cough. The damage assessment in the morning was better than it could have been, and worse than they needed. The barn's south wall would require full replacement. 2 fence lines down, meaning the east cattle had to be moved and held elsewhere while repairs were made. The root cellar had taken water, and several barrels of winter stock would need to be inspected and some portion written off as lost. Abigail did the numbers at the kitchen table, while Samuel walked the property with Pete. And when he came back in, she had the estimate ready. He looked at it. He set it down. He said nothing, but his face did the thing again that compressed pressure, that deep-held weight. "There's a way to manage it," she said. "If you sell the stored timber from the east slope and defer the October supply order, you can cover the barn repair without touching the operating account. I know that. And the Helena lawyer, did you send the letter?" 2 weeks ago. "I'm waiting on a response. If the response is favorable, and if the quarterly payments stop." Abigail. His voice was not sharp. It was tired. "I understand the numbers. I know you understand the numbers. I know what you're trying to do." He put his hands flat on the table and looked at them. "I know." She stopped. He looked up. "Every time something goes wrong on this ranch, you figure out how to carry it. The accounts, the kitchen. The barn last night, you carry things that aren't yours to carry." "They are mine to carry," she said. "I work here." "That's not what I mean." "Then say what you mean." He looked at her for a long time. Outside, she could hear Pete and Cal beginning work on the fence line. The ordinary sounds of a ranch resuming itself after damage. "I mean that you've been here a month, and you carry everything you're given, and several things you're not given, and you don't ask for anything back, and I don't know what to do with that," he said. The kitchen was very quiet. "You don't have to do anything with it," she said. "That's just who I am." "I know who you are," he said. "That's the problem." She held his gaze. Her wrapped hand was on the table between them, and her heart was doing something she had decided not to name. He stood up. He went to the door. He stopped. "The lawyer and Helena wrote back this morning," he said. "I didn't tell you before because I was still." He stopped. "His name is Franklin Dodd. He thinks there's a case. He found a witness, a woman who was at the ranch during the last weeks of Ruth's illness. A neighbor. She says she's the man who came to speak with Ruth. Says Ruth told her afterward that she hadn't fully understood what she was signing. Abigail went still. She's willing to testify, Samuel said. Which means there's a real case now. Which means the quarterly payments stop. That's good, Abigail said. That's very good. It's because of you, he said. You made me stop waiting. He went out. She sat at the table with her wrapped hand in her lap and the account books open in front of her, and the morning light coming through the window. And she did not move for a moment that was longer than she intended. Clara Benson arrived at the ranch gate on horseback, which was unusual. She arrived alone, which was more unusual. She arrived at 11 in the morning on a Saturday, looking like someone who had made a decision and was committed to it. Abigail saw her from the kitchen window and went to the front porch. He's in the field, she said. I'm not here for Samuel. Clara dismounted. She tied the horse herself, which told Abigail something she did not want anyone else to see her arrive. I'm here to speak with you, then speak. Clara came to the foot of the porch steps. She looked up at Abigail, which was a reversal of how it had always been. And something about the configuration, Abigail standing. Clara below seemed to cost Clara something she hadn't planned for. I've been telling people things about you that I don't know to be true, Clara said. The words were so unexpected that Abigail took a moment to be sure she had heard them correctly. What kind of things? She said. That you came here for the land. That you knew about the legal trouble and targeted Samuel. She said it flat and fast. The way you say something difficult when you've decided that the only way is through. I don't know that to be true. I said it because I wanted you gone. Abigail looked at her. Why are you telling me this? Because last night, during the storm, my hired man told me this morning that you held a horse in a failing barn, and you didn't leave until Samuel made you. Clara's voice changed, lost some of its practiced quality, became something less controlled and more real. That is not the behavior of a woman after someone's land. Silence. No, Abigail said. It isn't. I've been unkind to you. Yes, I don't apologize easily, I've noticed. Clara looked at her. Something moved across her face, the expression of a woman who was not used to being faced with the thing she had done and having it held clearly in front of her. I'm sorry, she said, for the things I said about you in town. Abigail stood on the porch and looked at Clara Benson and thought about all the things she could say. The damage those words had done. The nights she had spent aware that somewhere in town, people were repeating a story about her that wasn't true. The old familiar weight of being talked about in ways she couldn't control. She thought about what it cost a woman like Clara to stand at the foot of someone's steps and say those two words. I hear you, Abigail said. I'd ask you to correct it with the people you told. I intend to, Clara said. She turned to her horse. Stop. He looks at you differently than he looked at Ruth, she said. Without turning back. Not less. Just differently. I wanted you to know that. Since I'm already here saying things I don't usually say. She mounted and rode back down the road. Abigail stood on the porch for a long time after the sound of the horse faded. He looks at you differently than he looked at Ruth. She went inside. She went to the stove. She started lunch. That evening, Samuel told her about Ruth. Not everything, but enough. He told her in the kitchen while she was washing the last of the supper dishes, standing beside her with his coffee, and the telling came in the way things come from Samuel Whitaker, not smoothly. Not in narrative order, but in pieces, each one placed carefully. Ruth had been kind, smart, the kind of woman who noticed what other people needed before they noticed it themselves. She had grown up nearby, had known the ranch her whole life, had loved it the way people love things they have grown with. She got sick slowly, and then fast, he said. That's what the doctor told me. Slow build, then it moved quickly. She knew before I did how it would go. She didn't tell me because she thought I'd stop everything and take care of her. She was right, I would have. He looked at the window. Someone from Harlow Creek Associates came to see her in February. I was in town. She didn't mention it to me. I found the paperwork she'd been given when I was going through her things after. His voice stayed even, but Abigail could hear the effort the evenness cost him. She had signed something. A letter of intent, they called it. To sell the east parcel at a price less than half its value. There was a note in her handwriting beside it she'd written, "So Samuel will have money for the hard years." The dish in Abigail's hands was dry. She kept drying it. "She thought she was doing something good," he said. "She was trying to take care of you," Abigail said. "Yes. And instead someone used that against her." "Yes." She set the dish down. She turned to face him. He was looking at the window still, at the dark beyond it, and she could see clearly what it cost him to say it, not the grief of it, which was old, and he had made his accommodation with, but the anger, the deep, structural anger of a man whose wife had been targeted in her most vulnerable hours and turned into a weapon against the life she was trying to protect. "Samuel," she said. He looked at her. She had not called him by his first name before. Not once. "It wasn't her fault," she said. "And it wasn't yours. Someone deliberate and calculating came into your home and took advantage of a woman who was dying and frightened and trying to love you. That is on them, not on her, not on you." He held her gaze. The lamp was low, the kitchen warm, and the distance between them was 3 feet, and also something else entirely. "I know that," he said quietly. "Most of the time I know that." "I know you know it," she said. "I just thought it needed saying by someone who wasn't inside it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Say the thing that's true even when it's hard. Even when you have nothing to gain from it." She thought about it honestly. "Because I spent a long time not saying true things, because I was afraid of what would happen if I did. I stopped being afraid of that." "What made you stop?" "A man wrote me a letter that said I wasn't worth choosing," she said. "And I realized I could either believe him or I could decide he was wrong. One of those choices cost me something. The other one cost me more. But only one of them was worth the price." He looked at her for a long time. Long enough that she had to remind herself to breathe normally. "He was wrong," Samuel said. It was 3 words. Simple words. Not a speech, not a declaration. But they landed with the weight of something that had been decided, rather than felt something considered and meant. She looked at her hands. She looked at the wrapped one, which still ached dully. "I know that," she said. Now the twist came 2 days later in a letter from Franklin Dodd in Helena. And it changed everything. Samuel brought it to the kitchen at noon. He set it on the table in front of her, and his face was doing something she had not seen before, tight and white, and held very carefully. She read it. Dodd had been investigating the Harlow Creek land and cattle associates as part of building the case. In the course of that investigation, he had pulled the company's incorporation records. The company had 2 principals. One of them was a man named Vincent Gale, whom Samuel had identified as the person who had visited Ruth. The other principal was listed as a silent partner. Her name was Margaret Benson, Clara Benson's mother, which meant Clara's father, the man who owned the bank in Harlow Creek, the man whose money and influence ran through the town like groundwater, almost certainly knew. And if he knew, then Clara Benson, who had come to this ranch twice, who had told stories about Abigail around town, who had stood at the foot of the porch steps and offered an apology. Abigail set the letter down. "Does Dodd know if Clara knew?" she said. "He doesn't know yet." Samuel's voice was stripped down. Flat. "Her mother is listed as silent partner. That's all he's confirmed." "Clara's apology," Abigail said slowly. "She came here 2 days ago." "I know. If she knew what her family had done, she may have come to assess what we knew." He said it without inflection, which was worse than anger. Abigail sat with this. She thought about Clara at the foot of the steps, the practiced quality of her usual manner gone, the thing that had seemed like genuine discomfort. "He looks at you differently than he looked at Ruth." Or she didn't know, Abigail said, and she was genuinely apologizing. And when this comes out, she's going to discover that her family is responsible for what was done to a dying woman. Samuel looked at her. "Both of those things can be true," Abigail said. "People aren't always one thing." "No," he said. "They're not." He picked up the letter. "Dodd wants to meet in person. Next week in Helena. He says the case is strong enough to move forward, but he needs my testimony and whatever original documents I can bring." "I'll go with you," Abigail said. He looked up sharply. "The accounts," she said. "I've documented the quarterly payments." Dates, amounts, the notations in the ledger. That's evidence of money being extracted under duress. Dodd will need that record. He held her gaze for a moment. You'd come to Helena, if you'll allow it. He looked at her for a long time, and she could see him deciding something that was bigger than the practical question of whether to bring her account records to a legal meeting. Yes, he said. I'll allow it. She nodded. She pulled the account journal toward her and began marking the relevant pages. She did not let herself think about the 3-day journey, about the close quarters of travel, the small hours of a roadhouse stop, the long miles of Montana with nothing between them and the sky. She thought about the accounts. She thought about the evidence. She thought about what a dying woman had written in the margin of a letter she hadn't understood. So Samuel will have money for the hard years, she thought. Ruth, we're going to fix this. She marked another page. Her wrapped hand ached, and she didn't care. And outside, the Montana sky was going dark at the edges with the first suggestion of another change in weather. And the ranch went on around her in its ordinary living way. And something underneath all of it was moving faster than it had any of the previous days. Building toward something she couldn't yet see clearly, but could feel the way you feel a change in air pressure, not with your mind, but with your whole body, as a single certain fact. The road to Helena took 3 days by wagon, and Samuel had arranged for Henry to manage the ranch in his absence, which Henry accepted with the specific combination of pride and alarm of a man who had been trusted with something large. Pete Dalton had said nothing when Samuel told the men he was going to Helena for legal business. But when Abigail carried her traveling bag to the wagon at 5 in the morning, Pete was already there. He took the bag from her without a word and put it in the back. He checked the wheel on the left side, which had been running slightly loose, and tightened it. He stepped back. Road gets rough past the second creek crossing, he said. There's a better line through the north side. I know it, Samuel said. Pete looked at Abigail. You've got the account journal. In the bag, she said. He nodded. He stepped back further. Good luck, he said. And it was addressed to both of them equally, which meant something. They left before full light. The first hour they rode in the companionable quiet she had come to understand was Samuel's natural register, not unfriendly, not distant, simply a man who did not fill silence for the sake of filling it. She sat beside him on the wagon bench with her hands in her lap and watched Montana open up in the early morning, wide and gray gold and enormous. When did you first know something was wrong with the Galt payments? She asked. He kept his eyes on the road. 8 months after Ruth died. A man came to the ranch, said he was representing Harlow Creek land and cattle. Said the letter of intent Ruth had signed constituted a binding agreement, and that I owed them the difference between the agreed price and current market value. What did you do? I told him to leave my property. And then the letters started. First polite, then legal language, then the monthly invoices for what they called outstanding settlement obligations. His jaw tightened. I paid the first one because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want Ruth's name in a public dispute. I didn't want people knowing she'd been used that way when she was vulnerable. I thought I could find a way to end it quietly, and instead it became a system, Abigail said. Yes, they knew you'd pay to protect her reputation, she said. That's why they targeted a dying woman in the first place. Not just for the land, for the leverage. He was quiet for a moment. Then I came to that conclusion about 6 months in. That's when I contacted the lawyer in town, who told me the verbal agreement would be nearly impossible to fight. He was wrong, Abigail said. Or he was poorly informed, or she stopped. Samuel looked at her. Or he was something else, she said carefully. Dodd said the same thing when I told him about the first consultation, Samuel said. He's looking into it. The wagon rolled on. The sun came up fully, turning the land from gray to gold, and they rode into the light without speaking for a while. And Abigail thought about a system built on a dying woman's love for her husband. And she felt something quiet and cold settle in her chest that was not grief, and was not quite rage, but lived in the neighborhood of both. They stopped at noon at a roadhouse 20 miles east of the Second Creek crossing. The place was run by a large woman named Vera, who fed them beef and potatoes without ceremony and refilled the coffee without being asked. There were 4 other travelers in the room, 2 cattlemen heading north, a family with a wagon piled with their possessions, and a man in a dark coat who sat alone and watched the room without appearing to. Abigail noticed the man in the dark coat because she noticed most things, and because he had looked at Samuel specifically when they came in a quick, calibrated look, the kind that was not curiosity but recognition. She said nothing until they were back in the wagon. "The man in the dark coat," she said. Samuel's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I saw him. You know him. He's worked for Harlow Creek Associates before. Runs messages." He kept his voice even. "He was in town 3 weeks ago. He followed us," she said. "Or he's going to Helena anyway. Do you believe that?" A pause. "No." She turned this over. "They know you're going to Helena. They know about Dodd. Someone told them." She thought about the town. The bank. The Benson family. "Clara came to the ranch 2 days before you got Dodd's letter," she said slowly. "I know." She could have seen the letter. She could have. Or she could have heard about Dodd some other way. "Her father has contacts in Helena." Samuel said nothing. "I'm not saying she's lying about the apology," Abigail said. "I'm saying she may not be the only person involved in this. And that whatever she knew or didn't know, someone in her family's circle is aware we're moving." "Then we move faster," Samuel said. He shook the reins. The horse quickened. Franklin Dodd was not what Abigail had pictured from his letters. His letters were precise and measured, the correspondence of a careful man. Dodd himself was 60, compact, with the kind of alertness in his eyes that came from decades of watching what people did when they thought the formal part was over. He met them at his office at 9 in the morning of the second day and shook Samuel's hand, and then Abigail's without hesitation, which she noted. "Miss Carter," he said, "you're the one who found the payment records." "I was doing the accounts," she said. "Sit down, both of you." He spread papers on his desk. "Here's where we stand. Ruth Whitaker's letter of intent is dated February the 14th, 1883. At that time, according to her doctor's records, which I've subpoenaed, she was being treated with laudanum for pain management and had been for approximately 6 weeks. The dosage was significant. Samuel was very still. A person under that level of pharmaceutical management may not have had full legal capacity to enter a binding agreement, Dodd said. Additionally, the letter of intent, when I examined it closely, was witnessed by a man named Theodore Pruitt, who is or was an employee of Harlow Creek Land and Cattle Associates. Abigail looked up. The witness was their own man. Yes, which means the signing was not independently witnessed, which creates a significant problem for the enforceability of the document. Dodd looked at Samuel. "But I need something else. The neighbor woman, Eleanor Marsh, she's agreed to testify. She says she was present when the Harlow Creek representative visited Ruth. She says Ruth told her afterward that she hadn't read the full document, that the man had explained it verbally, and she trusted the explanation." "That's enough," Samuel said. "It's substantial, but there's more." Dodd pulled a separate sheet forward. "In investigating the company principals, I found that Harlow Creek Land and Cattle Associates was incorporated with capital, provided largely by the First Bank of Harlow Creek." He looked at Samuel over his spectacles. "Which is owned by Robert Benson." The room was very quiet. "Clara Benson's father funded the company that defrauded you," Abigail said. "He is a principal financier." "Yes," Dodd said. "Whether he directed the specific scheme against Mrs. Whitaker, that's what I'm still building. But the money trail is clear." Samuel stood up. Abigail watched him walk to the window and stand there with his back to the room. And she watched his shoulders and the set of his neck, and she understood what it cost him to hold himself that still in this moment. "The lawyer in town," Samuel said. "The one who told me the verbal agreement would be nearly impossible to fight." Dodd shuffled papers. "Marcus Webb." Yes, Dodd found what he was looking for. Marcus Webb received a retainer payment from the First Bank of Harlow Creek beginning in January of 1883. He has been on their informal payroll since before you first consulted him. Samuel turned around. He sent me away on purpose. He sent you away on purpose, Dodd confirmed. The silence in the room lasted long enough to have weight. Then Samuel said, "What do you need from us?" "The account journal Miss Carter has brought. Her testimony about the payment structure. Your testimony about the original visit and subsequent correspondence. And Eleanor Marsh, who I'll have brought in separately." Dodd removed his spectacles and looked at both of them. "I want you to understand what this means if we move forward. Benson is powerful in that town. His bank holds mortgages on half the properties in the county. This won't be a quiet case. People will have to choose sides." "I know that," Samuel said. "Some of them will choose his side, not because they think he's right, but because he holds their debt. I know that too. And you want to proceed." Samuel looked at Abigail. She held his gaze steadily, with nothing on her face that tried to influence him. This was his land. His wife, his call, but everything on her face that said she would not look away. "We proceed," he said. The moment Abigail had not planned for came that evening. They were at the roadhouse where Dodd had arranged their accommodation, 2 separate rooms. A situation that had been stated plainly and required no discussion. She was in the small downstairs sitting room, going over the account journal a final time, making sure every notation was clear when Samuel came downstairs. He sat across from her. He watched her work. After a moment he said, "There's something I need to tell you." She looked up. "Before you came to Helena with me, before I agreed to bring you, I spoke to Dodd by letter about the situation here." He paused. "Not just the legal situation, the broader situation." She kept her face still. "What broader situation?" "He asked me why I hadn't moved forward with the case earlier. After I'd found the Helena contacts. I told him that someone had arrived at the ranch who had pushed me to stop waiting." He looked at his hands. "He asked who I told him. He asked what my intentions were regarding you." Abigail set down her pen. "And I answered him," Samuel said. Silence. "What did you tell him?" she said. He looked at her directly. "I told him that my intentions were honorable and that I hadn't yet spoken to you about it because you had made it clear that you came here to work, and I wasn't going to say something that made your position uncomfortable." She held his gaze. Her heart was doing the thing again that she had been refusing to name. "And now," she said, "and now we're away from the ranch. And you've sat with a lawyer all afternoon and given testimony on my behalf, and I have run out of reasons to keep being careful about this." He said it plainly, without drama, in the same tone he used to discuss fence lines and cattle counts, which somehow made it more real than any elaborate declaration would have been. "I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I'm not asking for anything. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. Because you're a woman who values being told the truth directly. And this is the truth." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about Gerald Pruitt's letter, which was still in her bag. She thought about what it had cost her to come here. What it had cost to let herself care about things at this ranch: the horses, the herb pots, the account books, the way Henry moved around a kitchen, the way Pete had taken her bag without being asked, the way a man had sat across from her in the dark and said he was wrong, like it was a fact he had verified and found reliable. "I came here to work," she said. "I know. And I have been working. I know that too. And somewhere along the way," she said, "slowly I have also." She stopped. She looked at the account journal, which blurred slightly and then cleared. "I have also developed feelings that I told myself were not practical and not safe, and that I have been managing with varying degrees of success." He was very quiet. "I don't know what I'm worth to someone," she said. "Not in this particular way. I have evidence suggesting I am not worth very much." She said it clearly, without self-pity, just stating a fact she had examined. Gerald Pruitt looked at me and decided I was not what he had envisioned. I have spent a considerable amount of time since then trying to determine whether he was a fool or whether he saw something true. "He was a fool," Samuel said. "You haven't known me very long enough." He leaned forward slightly. "Abigail, I have known 3 kinds of people in my life. People who do things for what they'll get back. People who do nothing, because nothing is safe. And people who do what needs doing, Because they cannot live with themselves if they don't. He held her gaze. You are the third kind. I have met perhaps 4 people in my life who are that kind. Ruth was one. You are another. She felt the weight of Ruth's name in that sentence, not as competition, not as comparison, but as the highest form of regard this particular man had to offer. That's not a small thing to say, she said. No, he said. It isn't. She looked at him. She thought about Montana, which did not warn you but simply arrived. She thought about a barn in a storm and a hand that had cleaned a cut with iodine in a kitchen full of tired men, and a voice that had said her name, her first name, in a way that had bypassed every piece of armor she had built and hit something underneath. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight, he said again. I meant that. I know you meant it, she said. That's part of the problem. He almost smiled. That same almost smile, that slight shift at the line of his mouth. Go to sleep, Mr. Whitaker, she said. He stood. He picked up his hat from the table. Samuel, he said, if you're willing. She looked at the journal. Good night, Samuel. She heard him go upstairs. She sat for a very long time with her hands flat on the open pages of the account book, and the lamp burning low and the sounds of the Helena Roadhouse settling into quiet around her. And she breathed carefully. And she did not reach for Gerald Pruitt's letter. And she did not make any decisions. But she was aware, with a clarity that had nothing to do with thinking, that something had already been decided, had been decided slowly, over weeks, in kitchens and barns, and account books and conversations in lamplight, without anyone calling it by name. The hearing with Dodd lasted 2 days. Eleanor Marsh testified on the second morning, a woman of 70, small and firm, who took her seat across from the assembled legal parties with the manner of someone who had been waiting to say a thing for a long time and was finally going to say it. She described the visit, the man who came to see Ruth, the way Ruth had explained it afterward, confused, hopeful, believing she had arranged something good. The way the man had spoken to Ruth as though she was a child, slowly and with false warmth, the documents he had placed before her, the pen he had put in her hand. When Eleanor Marsh finished speaking, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Dodd said, I think that concludes what we need. On the way home, Samuel drove for the first hour without speaking. Abigail sat beside him and let him have the silence, because she understood it was not emptiness but processing. The kind of quiet that means a person is moving something very large from one place to another inside themselves. Eventually, he said, she thought she was helping me. She was trying to love you, Abigail said. In the only way she had left. He was quiet again. She would have hated knowing what it became, he said. I know, Abigail said. So let's make sure it ends. They were 2 hours from the ranch when the man in the dark coat appeared again. He was on horseback on the road ahead, and he did not move aside when Samuel slowed the wagon. He sat in the road with his horse blocking the way and looked at Samuel with an expression that was calibrated to communicate something. Mr. Whitaker, he said, Mr. Benson would like to speak with you. Mr. Benson can send a letter, Samuel said. Mr. Benson feels that a conversation might be more productive. He's prepared to be generous. He was prepared to be generous when he had my wife sign a document she didn't understand, Samuel said. I'm not interested in his generosity. The man held his position. Mr. Whitaker, there are a lot of families in Harlow Creek whose mortgages come up for renewal this year. Mr. Benson would hate for any difficulties to affect people who have nothing to do with this situation. Abigail heard it before she fully understood it, felt the shape of it. Then she understood. He was threatening the town. Not Samuel, specifically the town. Move off the road, Samuel said. Sir, I said move off the road. The man held for a moment longer. Then he moved his horse to the shoulder, and Samuel drove past him, without looking back. Abigail turned and watched the man watching them. He did not follow. He just threatened to call in mortgages, she said. I know. On people who have nothing to do with this case. I know that too. Samuel. She turned to face him. That changes what this is. This isn't just about your land anymore. If Benson is willing to punish innocent families to protect himself, then more people are going to need to know what he's done, Samuel said. Yes, he nodded once, the same nod. Sufficient when we get back, he said. I need to talk to some people. Which people? The ones who matter in that town. The ones who have been under Benson's thumb and know it. He looked at the road ahead. And I need to do something else first. What? He was quiet for a moment. I had a conversation with Dodd about the case. About what comes next. About he stopped. Started again differently. I asked Dodd something. Something personal. He gave me an answer. I need to ask you the same question before anything else happens. Her heart was very deliberate in her chest. What question, she said. He kept his eyes on the road. A woman in your position coming to this territory. This ranch. This situation, she deserves to know what she's signing on for. What the full picture is. Not just the land dispute and the legal case. The whole picture. I know the whole picture, she said. You know most of it. Then tell me the rest. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not say it. Then he did. This ranch is my life, he said. It's everything I have and everything I've built, and I'm not going to be someone who is easy to live with because I love this work the way some men love liquor. It's first. It's constant, and it requires something of whoever is near me. He said it without apology and without drama. Just plain. Ruth understood that. She built her life around it because it was also hers. I don't know if I have the right to ask someone else to build their life around it. You're not asking me to build my life around yours, Abigail said. He looked at her. You're asking if I'm capable of building something next to what you've built, she said. That's different. She met his gaze steadily. I didn't come here to find someone else's life to fit into. I came here to build my own. And it happens that what I've built in 2 months, those herb pots, those account books, that kitchen, those men who now say good morning to me like they mean it, it happens that it's here. On this land, he stared at her. I would like it to stay here, she said. If that's agreeable to you. The wagon rolled forward. The ranch was visible in the distance now, a shape in the late afternoon. Smoke coming from the chimney, which meant Henry had started supper. Samuel looked at it the way she had seen him look at it before, with that fundamental feeling that was past expression. Then he reached across and put his hand over hers where it rested on the bench. He did not say anything. He did not need to. She turned her hand over. Their fingers found each other. She looked at the road. The ranch grew closer. The smoke rose, straight and steady in the still air. Somewhere inside it, Henry was making something that would feed tired men. And Pete would be checking that left wheel again out of habit. And the herb pots on the porch were either surviving or they weren't. And the account books were where she had left them. And all of it was real, and none of it was going to be taken without a fight. She held his hand, he held hers. They rode home. Robert Benson made his move the morning after they returned. Abigail was in the kitchen at 5:15 when Henry came in from the road with a face that meant something had happened. He held a printed notice, the kind posted in public, on the board in front of the general store. She took it and read it. It was a notice of legal action, filed by the First Bank of Harlow Creek against Samuel Whitaker for defaulting on what it described as a standing verbal loan agreement, a debt of a sum large enough to be devastating, with no contract attached, no dates, no terms, just a number and Samuel's name and the bank's seal. There was no such loan. She knew every account. She had been through every record. There was no such loan. It's fabricated, she said. I know, Henry said. He's trying to get ahead of us. Establish a counterclaim before the case moves forward. She set the notice on the table. He's scared. A scared Benson is a dangerous Benson, Henry said. Samuel came in from outside. He had already seen it. Pete had taken one off the board before anyone else in town could read it carefully. He set his copy on top of hers. He looked at them both. His face was very calm and very decided. Get Pete, he said to Henry. And send a wire to Dodd. I need him here, not in Helena. Henry went. Samuel looked at Abigail. He just made the biggest mistake he could have made, she said. Yes, Samuel said. He filed a false legal notice. In public. That's not strategy. That's panic. I know. Which means Dodd's case is stronger than Benson thought. Something spooked him. Eleanor Marsh's testimony, Samuel said. He found out she testified. He didn't know about her. He sat down across from her. Clara told me this morning. She came at dawn. She didn't know her mother was listed as principal. She found out last night when her father told her he was taking action. His voice was flat. She was crying, I believe her. Abigail absorbed this. What did she ask for? Nothing, she said she was sorry. She said she didn't know. He was quiet. I believe that too. Then she might be willing to say so publicly, Abigail said. A Benson, standing up in that town and saying that her own family schemed against a dying woman. I'm not asking her to do that, Samuel said immediately. No, but if she offers, I won't ask. Abigail nodded. This was right. This was him. She pulled the notice toward her. She read it again, every word. She found it the name at the bottom. The notary who had processed the filing. She looked up. Samuel, the notary on this document, T. Pruitt. He looked at her. Theodore Pruitt, she said. The same man who witnessed Ruth's letter of intent. The same man. 14 months and 2 fraudulent documents, and the same name on both. Samuel stood up. Write to Dodd, he said. Tell him to bring whatever he has on Pruitt. Tell him we have the witness connecting both documents. He went to the door. And Abigail looked up. Thank you, he said. Not for any one thing, for everything. She held his gaze. Go talk to your men, she said. They need to hear it from you. All of it. He went. She picked up her pen. She began to write. Outside the kitchen window the morning was full bright, and the ranch was moving in its ordinary way, and Robert Benson's notice was on the table in front of her, and it was fear dressed up as power. And she knew the difference, and she was not afraid of either one. She was afraid of one thing only, one honest thing that lived beneath all of this, and that she had stopped pretending wasn't there. And that thing, that particular, unnamed, real thing, had taken her hand on a wagon bench the evening before and held it without letting go. All the way home, she wrote the letter to Dodd. Her handwriting was steady. Her hand, the wrapped one, the hurt one, did not shake. Franklin Dodd arrived 2 days later on the morning stage, carrying a leather case that he held close to his body, the way men hold things they know are valuable. He came straight to the ranch without stopping in town, which Abigail noted and approved of. Henry brought him coffee before he had his coat off. Pruitt, Dodd said, setting the case on the kitchen table and opening it while he was still standing. Theodore Pruitt is not a licensed notary in this county. His certification lapsed in 1881. Every document he has witnessed since then has no legal standing. Samuel sat very still. Both documents, Abigail said. Ruth's letter of intent and the false loan notice. Both documents, Dodd confirmed. Witnessed by a man with no legal authority to witness anything. Which means neither document can be entered as evidence in any proceeding. Which means Harlow Creek Land and Cattle Associates has been collecting payments from you for 14 months based on an entirely unenforceable claim. He looked at Samuel over his spectacles. I want to file in the county court by end of week. Not in Helena. Here, in Harlow Creek, in their own town. Samuel looked at Abigail. She looked back. In their own town, Samuel said. Benson filed his false notice here, Dodd said. We answer it here. In front of the people he thinks he owns. He closed the case. This is where it ends. The news moved through Harlow Creek, the way news always moved through small towns, faster than anyone planned, and with details that were simultaneously accurate and embellished. By the following morning, half the town knew that Samuel Whitaker had a Helena lawyer, and that something was happening regarding the bank. By afternoon, the other half knew, and the version they had acquired included the information about Ruth's letter, the laudanum, the fabricated loan notice, and Theodore Pruitt's lapsed certification. Pete Dalton came into the kitchen that evening with the particular expression of a man who had been in town and heard things. There are people talking, he said. I assumed, Abigail said. Not the way Benson would want. He leaned against the doorframe. Old man Garrett, he runs the feed store, he said he's known for 2 years that Benson was operating outside the lines. Said he never said anything because the bank holds his building loan. He paused. He said it in front of 6 people, including the minister. Henry looked up from his coffee. Which minister? Caldwell or the new one? Caldwell. Henry made a satisfied sound. Caldwell doesn't like Benson. Never has. There's something else, Pete said. His voice shifted. Clara Benson went to see Garrett this morning. She told him directly that her family's company had used a fraudulent document to extract money from Samuel. She said he stopped, seemed to be selecting the right word. She said she was ashamed. The kitchen was quiet. She didn't have to do that, Abigail said. No, Pete agreed. She didn't. Samuel was in the doorway now. He had been on the porch and had heard most of it. His face was measured, processing. How did Garrett respond? He asked. Told her it took courage to say it, Pete said. Then he told her that courage wasn't going to be enough and that she ought to be in that courtroom when the time came. And she said she'd be there. Samuel looked at Abigail. She held his gaze. People are going to have to choose, she said quietly. You said that in Dodd's office. I said some would choose Benson's side. Some will, she said. But Benson made a mistake when he threatened those mortgages. He reminded people that they were afraid of him. And there's a particular moment when a person who has been afraid for long enough suddenly gets tired of it. She looked at Pete. How many people were in the feed store when Clara spoke? Started with 6, Pete said. By the time she was done, there were 11. The court date was set for a Thursday. Dodd filed Monday morning, and by Monday afternoon, Robert Benson had retained 2 lawyers from the county seat. Which was itself information a man with nothing to hide does not hire 2 lawyers in the same afternoon. The night before the hearing, Abigail could not sleep. She lay in the narrow bed and listened to the ranch, and thought not about Benson or Pruitt or fabricated documents, but about the morning after this was over. Whatever morning that turned out to be, whatever the verdict made possible, or closed off, or changed irrevocably. She had sent Gerald Pruitt's letter out with the trash 2 weeks ago. She had not planned it specifically. She had been clearing old papers from the bottom of police reorganizing, which was what she did when things needed processing, and she had taken the letter out and looked at it for a moment, and then placed it on top of the paper she was discarding. And that had been that. She had not felt dramatic about it. She had felt something quieter than dramatic. Something like a door closing from the inside. The kind you close yourself because you are ready to. Not because something pushed you out. She was almost asleep when she heard the knock. Light. Knuckles against wood, low on the door, careful not to wake if she was already under. She was not already under. She got up and opened the door. Samuel stood in the hall in his work clothes, hat in hand. He looked like a man who had also not been sleeping. I needed to tell you something, he said. Before tomorrow. Come in, she said. He shook his head. I'll say it here. He looked at her directly. Whatever happens tomorrow, if the court goes as Dodd believes, or if it doesn't, I need you to know that none of this ends with the hearing. She waited. What I said on the wagon, he said. That wasn't a circumstance. It wasn't because of the case or Helena or any of it. It was because it was true and I had run out of reasons to keep it to myself. He held her gaze. I've been running a ranch alone for 4 years. I was good at it. I didn't think I needed anything different. A pause. I was wrong about that. She looked at him in the doorway in the low lamplight of the hall, and she thought about a woman who had packed a bag with $11.40 and come to a state she'd never been to for a job. She'd answered in a newspaper and had expected nothing. Had protected herself carefully against expecting anything. Had been so deliberately sensible about all of it. You're not an easy man, she said. No. You're quiet in ways that require learning. You notice everything and say a fraction of it. You love this land the way other men love their own names. She looked at him steadily. I have been learning you for 2 months and I suspect it takes considerably longer. It does, he said simply. I'm willing to take the time, she said. He held her gaze. Something moved through his face that was past words, the expression of a man who has been careful and patient and controlled for years, receiving something he had not let himself fully want. Get some sleep, Samuel, she said. Tomorrow needs both of us. He almost smiled. The real version, this time fuller than the almost smiles she had catalogued. It transformed his face, briefly, into something younger and unguarded, and entirely itself. "Good night, Abigail," he said. She closed the door. She stood with her back against it for a moment in the dark. Then she went back to bed and slept deeply and without interruption until 4:15. The Harlow Creek Courthouse held perhaps 80 people comfortably. By 8 in the morning on Thursday, it held 120. Abigail had not expected it. She walked in beside Samuel and Dodd and saw the packed room and understood, in a way that landed differently than the abstract knowing of the past week, that this had become larger than one ranch and one family's loss. She saw familiar faces: Vera from the roadhouse, who had driven 40 miles. Old man Garrett from the feed store in his best coat. The minister Caldwell seated near the front. Pete sat with Cal and Wade and Henry in a row, all of them clean-shaved, which told her they had discussed it. She saw people she didn't know: ranch families, shopkeepers, women with children, people who had come because something was happening in their town, and they intended to witness it. She saw Clara Benson in the second-to-last row, alone, sitting with her hands folded in her lap, and her face composed in the specific stillness of someone who is holding themselves together through will rather than ease. Clara looked at Abigail when she entered. Abigail held her gaze for a moment and gave a small nod. Clara returned it. Robert Benson sat at the front with his 2 lawyers and did not look at anyone. He was a large man, prosperous, the kind of face that had spent decades being agreed with. He sat with the posture of a man who still believed the room would bend to him, because rooms always had. And Abigail watched him scan the crowd once, then twice, and she watched the specific moment when the count became real to him, when he understood that the 120 people in this room had not come to support him. His hands were still on the table, but his jaw worked slightly. Just once, and then he stilled it. Dodd presented the case with the economy and precision of a man who understood that excess detail loses a room faster than insufficient detail. He laid it in sequence: Ruth's illness, the visit, the letter of intent signed under pharmaceutical impairment, witnessed by the company's own man, whose certification was expired, the 14 months of payments extracted under the threat of legal action that had no legal foundation, the fabricated loan notice filed the week prior, Theodore Pruitt's name on both documents. Pruitt was not in the courtroom. He had left Harlow Creek 2 days ago. Dodd had noted this without commentary, which was its own commentary. Eleanor Marsh testified. She was small and deliberate, and she spoke without drama. And the room was so quiet while she spoke that Abigail could hear the breathing of the person beside her. Eleanor described Ruth's voice when she had explained what she had done: hopeful, a little uncertain, using words that suggested she had not fully understood the document's legal weight. She described the Harlow Creek representative's manner as smooth and patient, and very careful to stay just this side of a direct lie. When Eleanor finished, the judge looked at Benson's lawyers. They conferred. One of them stood. He challenged Eleanor's account. He suggested her memory was imperfect. He suggested that Ruth Whitaker, as an adult woman, had entered a voluntary agreement regardless of her medical circumstances. From the second to last row, Clara Benson stood up. She said. The room turned. Benson's head turned. "I have a statement," she said. Her lawyer, not Benson's lawyer. A different man Abigail had not noticed until now. Seated beside Clara stood as well. Miss Benson has prepared a sworn affidavit regarding knowledge of her family's financial involvement with Harlow Creek Land and Cattle Associates. The room did not erupt. It went the other kind of loud, the kind made of 100 people drawing breath at the same time. Benson's 2 lawyers put their heads together. One of them leaned toward Benson. Whatever Benson said back, it was not quiet enough, because the judge heard it and looked at him with the specific expression of a man who has been on the bench for 20 years and is not impressed. "Miss Benson will be heard," the judge said. Clara Benson walked to the front of the room. She did not look at her father. She looked at the judge. She spoke clearly and without hesitation, and she said that her mother, Margaret Benson, had been listed as a silent partner in Harlow Creek Land and Cattle Associates, that her father had provided the operating capital, that she had discovered this 2 weeks ago and had not known it prior, and that she believed the scheme had been designed specifically to target properties the bank wished to acquire at below market value. She said, Ruth Whitaker was a good woman who was trying to help her husband. She deserved better from this town and from my family. I am sorry that I cannot offer her that better outcome. I can only offer the truth. The room was absolutely still. Benson looked at his daughter. Abigail watched his face. She had expected anger. What she saw was something worse than anger. It was the expression of a man who had believed that his world was fully under his control and was watching that belief revise itself in real time. In public, in a room full of people who were witnessing every second of the revision. He looked around at Garrett, who met his gaze and did not look away. At Caldwell, who looked back without expression. At the ranch families and the shopkeepers and the women with children and all the people whose mortgages he held and whose town he had believed he owned. His hands on the table were trembling, not violently. The small tremor of a man whose control is still present but has become effortful. He did not speak. He did not stand. He looked at his two lawyers and something passed between them, and one of the lawyers put a document on the table and slid it toward the judge. And the judge read it and looked up and said, with the particular flatness of someone delivering a verdict they consider obvious, motion to dismiss the counterclaim is granted. With respect to the primary matter of fraudulent extraction, Abigail stopped hearing the individual words because she was watching Samuel's face. He was looking at the front of the room. His jaw was set. His hands were on his thighs, and she watched him take a slow breath, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. From a place that has been held tight for a very long time, and let it out. Just that one breath. Henry was beside her, and she felt Henry's hand briefly on her shoulder. Quick, firm press, the contact of an old man who is deeply moved, and does not know another way to say so. She put her hand over his for a moment. He looked at Samuel. He turned and found her, without searching, the way people find things they have learned exactly where to look for. He looked at her, and she looked back. And the judge was still speaking, and the room was beginning to release itself into sound. And between all of that, she and Samuel were simply looking at each other, in the way of people who have come through something together and arrived on the other side. Robert Benson left the courtroom before the session was formally closed. He stood, and his lawyer stood with him, and he walked to the door. No one moved to stop him. No one needed to. The room watched him go, and the watching was its own verdict. 120 people who had seen what he was and would carry that seeing back to every corner of Harlow Creek. He did not look at Clara. Clara sat in her row with her hands in her lap and watched him leave. Her face did not change, but Abigail, who was watching her, saw her shoulders drop by precisely 1 inch, the involuntary release of someone who has been braced for impact, and found that the impact, while real, was survivable. Outside the courthouse, people gathered the way they gather, after events that matter not with ceremony, but with the particular loosening of people who have shared something and need to be near each other while they process it. Garrett found Samuel and shook his hand. He held it longer than a handshake required. He said something low that Abigail couldn't hear, and Samuel nodded. Caldwell came next. Then 2 ranch families she hadn't met, who introduced themselves and said their names and said they were glad. A woman named Dorothy, whose husband's feed loan had been leveraged against him for 2 years, said, simply thank you. She said it to Samuel, and then she looked at Abigail and said it again. Pete Dalton appeared at Abigail's elbow. Henry's already planning a celebration supper, he said. Of course he is, she said. He's been talking about it since Tuesday. What's he planning? He won't say. He says it's a surprise. Pete looked at her sideways. He's been practicing. God help us, she said. Pete laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, the laugh of a young man who had stopped being careful with her some weeks ago and had become simply himself, which she valued more than the careful version. Clara Benson was near the courthouse steps when Abigail found her. She was alone. She was watching the crowd with an expression that was not easy to read, not grief exactly, not relief, something that combined both and was also neither. Clara, Abigail said. Clara looked at her. What you did in there took real courage, Abigail said. I want you to know I see that. Clara was quiet for a moment. My mother didn't know what the money was being used for, she said. She thought it was a land development consortium. An ordinary investment. She looked away. She's been crying for 3 days. She's not a bad woman. My father... She stopped. My father is a man who stopped seeing people as people some time ago. I don't know exactly when it happened. I think I didn't want to know. You know now, Abigail said. Yes. Clara looked at her directly. I spoke poorly of you to people in this town. Things I had no basis for saying, I know. I'd like to correct that. Properly. Not just the general version, the specific version. The people I said it to, one by one. Abigail looked at her. That would mean a great deal. Clara nodded. She looked at Samuel, who was across the gathering talking to Garrett. She looked back at Abigail. He's a good man, she said. I pursued him for the wrong reasons. I understood that before you arrived. You arriving just made it easier to redirect the feeling. The corner of her mouth moved not quite a smile, but adjacent. Take care of him. He takes care of himself, Abigail said. Quite well, I know. But someone should see him do it. Clara straightened. Good luck, Miss Carter. Good luck, Miss Benson, Abigail said. Clara walked down the steps alone, and she walked with her head up, which cost her something in a town where her family name had just been said aloud in a courtroom. And Abigail respected the cost. The supper Henry made was, against all reasonable expectation, extraordinary. He had recruited Cal and Wade and apparently bribed Pete into service. And by the time the ranch hands and Dodd and a handful of invited guests from town arrived at the table, there was a spread that represented Henry's full and determined effort applied to every dish he knew. He stood by the stove with the expression of a man receiving his life's highest honor. Henry, Abigail said when she saw the table. When did you have time? Tuesday, he said. Like I told Pete. I started Tuesday. You told me it was a surprise. It is a surprise. The surprise is that it's ready. She laughed. She could not help it. And it came out fully, not managed or contained, just real. And Henry's face at the sound of it was everything. Dodd ate 3 servings and said it was the finest meal he'd had west of Chicago. Pete disputed the claim on behalf of Abigail's cooking, which started a conversation that lasted 40 minutes and touched on biscuits, beef stew, the philosophical differences between Tennessee and Montana cuisine, and whether cornbread counted as bread or cake. Samuel sat at the head of the table and watched his men talk and eat and be loud and alive. And Abigail sat 3 chairs down and watched Samuel watching them. And she thought, this is what a home does. It holds people. That's the whole job. Dodd left after supper with a handshake for Samuel and a bow for Abigail, an old-fashioned gesture, genuine rather than mannered, and the evening settled into the ordinary sounds of a ranch night. The men drifted out. Henry fell asleep in the chair by the stove within 10 minutes, which was his consistent post-celebration tradition, and Pete covered him with a blanket from the supply room without commenting on it, which was his. And then the kitchen was quiet, and it was just the 2 of them. And the lamp was low, and Samuel was at the table, and Abigail was making the next morning's preparations because she always did, and she wasn't going to stop just because the day had been large. You don't have to do that tonight, he said. I know. She measured the flour. I want to. He was quiet, then Abigail. She turned. He was standing. He had something in his hand, small. She could not see it fully in the low light. He held it out. It was a ring. Simple. Silver, she thought. Or perhaps white gold, a thin band set with a small dark stone. Not a diamond. Something darker and more interesting. Shot through with what looked like tiny veins of copper. It was my grandmother's, he said. She was a practical woman. She said a ring should be beautiful, but it should also be able to be worn while working. She wore it every day of her life for 60 years. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. I'm not a perfect man, he said. I've been alone long enough that I've become set in ways I don't always notice. I'll be too quiet on days when you need words. I'll work when I should rest. I'll take too long to say important things. He held her gaze. But I will be honest with you. I will stand beside you in front of anyone who requires it. And I will choose you not because you are what I envisioned, but because you are real, and good, and mine, if you'll have it that way. She looked at the ring in his open hand. She thought about the train platform, the woman who had not bothered to lower her voice, the valise with $11.40, Gerald Pruitt's letter, which was gone now, dispersed into whatever became of discarded things, carrying its weight away with it. She thought about a horse in a storm, and a wrapped hand, and a lawyer's office in Helena, and a wagon bench in the late afternoon, with the ranch growing closer through the gold light. She thought about herb pots on a porch, account books reorganized to save a man time, a kitchen that had become, without her precisely deciding it would, the center of something worth centering. She thought, I didn't come here to be chosen. I came here to build something. And then she thought, and those two things turned out to be the same. She reached out and took the ring from his hand. She put it on herself, the practical finger. The working hand, the left one, the wrapped one, still faintly tender at the palm where the latch had caught. It fit as though it had been sized for her. She looked up at him. I have conditions, she said. Something lit in his eyes. Name them. The accounts stay mine. I reorganize them, and I intend to maintain them, and I will not be overruled on the filing system. Agreed. The herb pots stay on the porch. All three of them, including the rosemary, which I know you think is too close to the door. I don't think that. You looked at it twice. I was looking at the pot. Not the placement. He paused. The placement is fine, and she said, when you are too quiet on days when I need words, I will tell you. And you will not take it as criticism. You will take it as information. He looked at her for a moment. Then, and when I have used all my words for the day, and you keep talking, I'll make you coffee and eventually stop, she said. Acceptable, he said. She looked at the ring on her hand. He reached out and took that, the same hand he had wrapped in the kitchen, the night of the storm, the same hand he had held on the wagon bench, and he held it with the same steadiness. And she looked up at him. And the lamp was burning low, and Henry was asleep in the chair, and the ranch was breathing around them in its ordinary nighttime way. I didn't choose you because you were perfect, he said. I know, she said. I chose you for the same reason. He pulled her in then, and she went, and she put her face against his chest, and felt the solid reality of him and the warmth and the heartbeat. Steady and unhurried, the heartbeat of a man who had learned patience the hard way and applied it to everything, including this. She had not been held like this, simply held, without performance or agenda, without someone calculating what they were getting in return, in so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. She found that she remembered. The body remembers the things the mind has carefully filed away. She did not cry. She did not need to. She simply stood in the kitchen of a ranch in Montana and let herself be exactly where she was. A year later, Harlow Creek looked mostly the same from the outside. The same main street, the same board sidewalks, the same general store, where old Garrett could buy boats most mornings drinking coffee and forming opinions. But the First Bank of Harlow Creek had new ownership. Robert Benson had sold it not voluntarily, exactly to a consortium of 3 local businessmen, one of whom was Garrett, in a sale overseen by the county court as part of the settlement of the fraud case. The terms of the sale included the renegotiation of all outstanding mortgages at standard rates, which meant that 11 families in the county had their debt costs reduced by asset amounts ranging from significant to transformative. Dodd had called this a secondary outcome. Abigail had called it the whole point. Theodore Pruitt had been located in Billings and charged with fraud in connection with the impersonation of a notary. He had pled in exchange for a reduced sentence and testified against Benson in the civil proceedings, which was the last piece Dodd had needed. Vincent Gale, the other principal of Harlow Creek Land and Cattle Associates, had provided testimony in exchange for immunity and had then left Montana permanently, which Abigail considered an acceptable trade. Margaret Benson, Clara's mother, had dissolved her partnership interest before the case concluded and had donated the returned capital to the county hospital, which was either genuine contrition or calculated optics and possibly both. Eleanor Marsh, who had testified, had said it was enough. Abigail took her word for it. Clara had stayed in Harlow Creek. She had opened a small lending library in a room adjacent to the general store, funded partly by her own savings and partly by a quiet donation that Abigail had arranged through the ranch accounts and had not mentioned to anyone except Henry, who approved. The morning Abigail saw Clara carrying books into the library, she stopped and watched. Clara arranged them on the shelf with care, straightening the spines, taking her time. She looked, from where Abigail stood, like a woman who had found something that fit. Clara saw her and waved. Abigail waved back. The herb pots on the porch of the Whitaker Ranch had multiplied. What had been 3 clay pots in August was, by the following summer, 8. Spread along the full length of the porch rail, the rosemary enormous now and woody at the base. The thyme spreading past its pot into the crack of the porch board and holding there successfully. Abigail had added basil and dill and 1 pot of something she had grown from seeds sister in Georgia had sent, which had turned out to be a variety of sweet pepper that did not, strictly speaking, belong in Montana, but had decided to exist there anyway through pure stubbornness. She found this fitting. The account books were current, organized, filed with the system she had built in the first weeks and refined since. The quarterly payments to Harlow Creek Land and Cattle Associates appeared in the record as a closed-line item. The final payment dated 14 months prior, the case notation beside it in her handwriting. Resolved, per court order, County of Harlow Creek. She had drawn a clean line under it. Single, straight, deliberate. The ranch was not a different place than it had been when she arrived. It was the same land, the same cattle, the same men. Pete still checked the left wheel by habit. Henry still fell asleep after large meals. Cal had developed the unsettling ability to predict rain 3 hours before it arrived. Samuel still rose before full light and made his last round of the property at night and said the most important things he had to say, either in the dark or in plain daylight with no drama between. But something in it had settled. Something had found its level. The way water finds its level when the container holds. That evening Samuel came in from the south field later than usual. She had held supper. He sat down and ate without apology for the hour, which she had long since accepted as simply how he was. And she sat across from him with her coffee and her account journal, and they occupied the same kitchen the way they always had, each in their own work. Both aware of the other, the space between them comfortable, in the way that only comes from time. He looked up at some point and caught her looking at him. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. He looked at her for a moment with that careful, filing away expression. "You're doing the thing where you think something and decide not to say it," he said. "I say things when they need saying, and when they don't need saying, I think them," she said. "At you, and you usually receive it eventually." He looked at her across the table in the low lamp of the kitchen they had eaten in together for a year, and he said, "I'm listening." She looked at him. She thought about the train platform, and the $11, and the woman who hadn't lowered her voice. She thought about everything she had carried in her valise, and everything she had discarded, and the one thing she had added, the small, silver-banded ring with the dark stones shot through with copper, practical enough to wear while working, which she had worn every day. She thought about what it felt like to stop waiting for someone to decide she was worth choosing, and to simply be, instead, a woman who knew her own worth and had found a man who was not intimidated by it. She put down the account journal. "I was thinking," she said, "that this is enough." He looked at her. "Enough, not small," she said. "Enough, the right size, the right weight." She met his eyes. "I came here with very little, expecting nothing, and this," she gestured. A small motion that meant the kitchen, the ranch, the pots on the porch, the men asleep in the bunkhouse, all of it. "This is more than enough." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "it is." Outside, the Montana night was enormous and full of stars that appeared in this part of the world with an excess that felt almost insistent, as though the sky was trying to make a point. The horses were settled. The wind was low. The porch herbs were holding their own against the season. Samuel reached across the table. She put her hand in his. It was not a dramatic moment. It was not the kind of thing that would be talked about afterward. It was simply two people at a kitchen table at the end of an ordinary day, holding on, which was, as Abigail Carter Whittaker had come to understand, the whole of it, the only thing it had ever needed to be.